Hi, today we're going to look at Communities of Practice, Learning, Meaning, and Identity by Etienne Wenger. So, people do much of their learning in communities of practice. What are the implications of Wenger's theory for contemporary educational theory? Wenger makes a point that in the 15th century, the burden of knowledge was on the community. There was very little travel. There was a very tight-knit community of practice, and there was identity between the type of knowledge in the community or a community of practice and the individuals within that community. Today, with people moving, there's a much broader intersection and overlap of communities of practice throughout the world in all different areas. And within Wenger's book, he looks at communities of practice. There's four components within the learning process. The first is that learning is meaningful to the individual. And if we go back to the 15th century, then that learning in that community, if it was, for example, if that there's where church builders came from, or stonemasons, for example, then that would be meaningful to the people in that community because they have a tradition of that. They probably learn it at an early age. They learn the relevance of it, and they learn to use it. And within that there, the second element is practice, where there's a shared history, a social resources. So the social resources could be a younger individual learning, let's say, a stonemason trade from a mentor. There's frameworks within that community that would allow or facilitate the interaction of these individuals. So ultimately, in terms of practice, it's a collaborative effort. It's not something that's done individually. The third element is community, which is social configurations. Enterprises defined whereby participation is competence. So the individual who enters into the community has an element of competence. So once the individual has a degree of competence in whatever trade it is or whatever skill, then they can relate to those within that community practice. So a violinist, for example, would have to have a certain element of competence to enter into a community, let's say a symphony orchestra, whereby they can play with that orchestra. And if they don't have that competence, then they will be on the outside of that community of practice. So competence is an important element in this process. The fourth element or component of learning, according to Wenger, is identity, and that there is how it is or what learning occurs that changes who we are, and that there so that there is looking at the four components of learning. There, within these four components, and how they affect educational theory today, is that educational theory and curriculum must be relevant. If we look at the meaningful element, it must be relevant and it must provide opportunity to be meaningful to the individual. Not only one person, but everyone that's involved in the course or the learning process. And the challenge with this is that today we have so much choice. If we compare again to the 15th century community, there probably wasn't a whole lot of choice within that community in terms of what people were going to do. Whereas today there's a very broad choice, and it makes it a little bit more difficult sometimes to experience deep learning because peoples are attracted to all different stimuli and different learning pieces might catch their attention, and so they might not get that deep learning connection. In terms of practice, it's a dynamic process, and the scaffolding of knowledge. There's and it's kind of interesting when we look at online learning compared to, let's say, a classroom learning. Then there's some benefits, for example, to the online piece that it doesn't have. If you look at Foucault, he kind of speaks to the online piece as it's it's liberating from the group, because if you're looking at, let's say, in terms of adult education, then the circle, then some people that may be marginalized or maybe are not as well read or as bright, then in that circle, which most people would consider as liberating and a healthy learning environment, for some people it may be intimidating. So the scaffolding of knowledge is important, whether it's like as an individual or within a group. But in terms of practice, that shared history and the shared collaborative effort is an important part of this process. So ultimately, sometimes someone will have an idea and they'll take the, it may not be the answer to the question, but it will allow someone else to build on that idea to scaffold that piece of knowledge. In terms of the community side of things, you have to become good so that you can interact, and that there is educational theory has to provide the opportunity for students to become good and to develop that competence so that they can interact with others, where their knowledge can grow and their skills can grow. So ultimately, if you look at it, in terms of educational theory, it has to cross boundaries. So that means that the communities of practice, there should be they should not only intersect, but they should overlap. That provides opportunity for learning and growth and extension. It should focus on what's important to the individual, and there should be opportunities whereby it can focus on what is important to the individual, and develop competence within their community of practice. One of the problems within schools, especially high schools, today is that it's difficult to develop that competence sometimes and that deep learning, because the curriculum is so full. And so that there is a challenge, because sometimes it's you want a shotgun approach so that you can put it all out, but so that people can find what it is that they are interested in, or is what is meaningful to them. But the limitation of that is that then there's not as much avenue then for the deep learning. So ultimately, we want to move knowledge as something that we give to kids to knowledgeability as a state of being, so we can get students to gain rigor about their own learning. And one of the really interesting pieces in Wenger that I'd like to conclude with is that he looks at, or asks the question, what is the minimum curriculum that we have to impose on everybody? And this really speaks to the identity piece, and where if you do go with that minimal curriculum that is essential to everyone, then what it does is it allows opportunity then for that knowledgeability and that expertise in the area of interest. And I really feel that there ultimately is the biggest piece of, or influence in terms of current educational theory today, is that trying to find out or identify what it is that minimum curriculum essential for everyone. And it kind of ties in with Archer, because in Archer's piece, Archer was trying to follow what is meaningful to the individual, And so if you combine the two so that you have a minimal curriculum, and then you can put together what is meaningful to that individual so that they can be reflexive and they can follow through on that, then that should produce a well-educated individual that has a solid base plus significant, dependable competence in an area that lets them function well within a community of practice. And that's it for today.